Greetings, everyone. Welcome to The Machine Lies, where we talk about how the machine lies on the machine that lies. Today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Skrbina, who is one of the philosophers of technology that most clarifies for me, especially during my time at the university. And I was studying at U of M Dearborn, and it was a place. We had Henry Ford's house in the back of the building, and it seemed like the Fairlane Center and the whole university was all geared towards ingenuity and technology. And we had a car parts center where they assembled and took apart cars, and it seemed like it was a very technological mood. And then we have there Dr. Skrbina, who's kind of, I made it a practice when I was at the university to go to the most radical corner, and find the most radical thinker I could find in the university. And this time, I think I was in for a pleasant surprise in terms of just how radical certainly Dr. Skrbina fit my demands of how radical a thinker was. I remember my parents had gone to Hajj, and I was taking a philosophy of technology class, and I didn't have money to get the book for philosophy of technology. This beautiful anthology right here, one of the most important anthologies, I believe, of our time in terms of philosophy, confronting technology. And I remember Dr. Skrbina had taken the book off the shelf with his notes still inside of it. See this pink thing here, and various notes on the suicide bomber, manifesto still intact inside of the book there, and at that time I was convinced that Dr. Skrbina had raised one of the most important questions of our time in dealing with the problem of technology, and had phrased this view in terms of technological determinism. And here we have a quote from Dr. Skrbina that kind of hits home the problem here. And the quote is, "This very de-emphasis on metaphysics suggests that technological thinking has dominated our approach to technology. Technology prefers that we focus on specifics, on details, on structure and function. This is indeed how it advances. Technology in the physical world is about machines, devices, invention, amusement, communication, information, profit, and power. Philosophy is the most meaningless in this context. Metaphysics wholly so. Technology bids us to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain." There is nothing behind technology, nothing to see. But we must ask, is this so? Is it not true that all phenomenon possess an inner or intrinsic nature subject to some kind of guiding principles? So I would like to ask Dr. Skrbina, what are these guiding principles? And just what is the metaphysics of technology, and how does it relate to the idea of panpsychism?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mohammed. Yeah, so that's...
well, I've been known to come up with those.
Yes, of course, right. So, so the basic problem, right, is we have a technological process that really seems to run on its own. It's like a self-driving, a self-guiding process. And we've known this for a long time. That idea has been around. It's a very old idea. It was there in a Lowell's book from 1954, The Technological Society. There was ideas in it that goes back to earlier thinkers in the 1800s and even the 1700s. This idea that is a kind of a driving force on its own. And to me, this was really like an impressive sort of concept that technology somehow could really drive itself without people doing the work, right? And what struck me is it seemed to be true, especially in this modern age. When you look at the way technology works in computers and cell phones and internet and so forth, it really does seem to seems to control people's lives. It's like a controlling force in our lives. And to me, this is just screaming out for a metaphysical solution, because that's a very complex and a powerful thing that can do something like that. So we need to understand what's driving this thing. How does this thing work? What's behind it, right? What's its essence, like I said in the book? And that gets to a kind of a real metaphysics of what is this thing called technology. And what struck me is that no one had really done this before. We had seen relatively superficial treatments. We'd seen critical views for centuries by a lot of thinkers, but there was really no penetrating metaphysical analysis of what's behind this. What's the kind of the inner reality of this technological process? And that's why I wrote the book Metaphysics of Technology, was to kind of lay out what I thought was a kind of a theory of the metaphysics of this phenomenon. And you're right. I mean, to me, it's something like a force of nature. It's something like evolution, where evolution is this driving process that creates order and complexity in the universe. If you go back to the Big Bang, it's not just a biological thing. It's a universal process of order coming out of relative disorder, creating complexity in the universe. Right?
I think that is the terminology that most loses people. Because you're dealing with something metaphysical in terms of essence. Yep. So you're thinking of something non-material. But then when you think of technology, it's just a pure objective fact.
It's purely material. It seems purely material.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it seems purely material until you focus on this one thing, which is the process of creation itself.
Well, exactly.
And that brings in mind into the formula. So,
well, exactly right, because it's bringing intelligence and order. It seems like an intelligent process. It's creating complex, intelligent devices like computers and cell phones and social media stuff and software programs. There's a kind of intelligence behind this order, and then you quickly go outside the sphere of human beings. This is one of the points I tried to make in the book, right? Because a lot of people focus on technology as purely a human thing, where it was just invented by people and we drive the process. This is the standard view of how technology works. So one of the first things I showed in the book was, well, it's clear that technology predates humans. It goes well into the animal realm. There's lots of examples of animals.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. You talk about that in the book. Yeah,
creating and using technology, right? So it's a process of nature by which whatever tools are constructed, or there's order or patterns, or they're building homes, and all animals will construct their reality to fit their needs, right? So they'll dig holes and they'll create burrows or whatever they need to do, nests and these kind of things, to survive and to flourish, right? So it's clearly a more than human phenomenon, but it's still technological. They're still creating devices and processes to achieve their ends in this world, right?
Right. So this would relate to panpsychism in terms of panpsychism,
right?
In terms of the order of creation, because it would seem like that. See, when a human being builds a city, like it seems like San Francisco and New York are the two biggest cities we have, but they're also the two biggest deep water ports. So it seemed like that it's another example of just human beings going around nature and just trying to fill in the design of that nature has already provided for them. And you described this creation as a second order nature.
Well, right. It's nature. It's nature made nature, right? Because people want to say, well, technology is something artificial. It's somehow outside of nature, but it's still a process of nature. I mean, we're using elements and forces, laws of nature. It's still a very natural process. So it can't be supernatural. It can't be, what is this thing that we call artificial? That's really kind of a fake name. I mean, it's things that humans are doing, but humans, of course, are natural beings, and they're using natural materials in their environment. So it's nature constructing nature. It's order constructing order, but that doesn't put it outside of the realm of nature. It's still a natural process by which complexity comes into the world in a kind of intelligent way, right? So I tried to connect it to these larger processes of intelligence in the universe. This was sort of what draws in this concept of mind and logos, right? Which again is a very old idea, as you know. It goes back to the ancient Greeks, and there's the idea of either a demiurge or a world soul, right? These kind of things, that there was some kind of a larger intelligence out there in the cosmos. And I think they were right. I think they were on the right track there to see things that way. So there's a kind of the logos, which for the early Greeks was basically God. It was a kind of a godlike being, which brought order and intelligence to chaos, to randomness in the world. And if it does that, I mean, it does that in all ordered things. All ordered things are a manifestation of this cosmic logos. So you see that in every ordered structure is an embodiment. It's like a little compressed element of mind from this natural process. And so it exists in every ordered structure. That's sort of where the panpsychist angle comes in, because panpsychism says that basically every structure in the universe has a kind of intelligence or a consciousness or a kind of awareness aspect to it, a mental aspect to it. And I would say, well, yes, that's true, because that's the embodiment of this logos process, which is a universal process, creating order, and then in conjunction with that, it's creating a mental aspect to things as well.
Yeah, it would definitely seem like the logos is active, and but the expression of it is completely mind, and it seems like that mind is something that is very strange when you think of mind and matter, and people always create a false dialectic between mind and matter. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of where our problem begins, is with the kind of dualistic nature of people plucking things from the world. Of course, what exactly is an original idea or artificial thing? I mean, it really doesn't make sense once you put the finger on it. Every idea seems to have come from somewhere.
Sure. Well, you're right. I mean, you're right. This is the problem. You get these dualistic theories about mind and matter, or mind and body, and so forth, right? Which I don't. Maybe it goes back to religious ideas, or maybe it's just back to superstitious concepts that that somehow there's this fundamental distinction between the matter aspect and the mental aspect of things, right? But so when you study philosophy, you realize that there are really huge problems with really any dualistic scheme. It's sort of incoherent, it's arbitrary. There's problems of interaction between these allegedly two aspects of reality. Most of the great philosophers in history have come on the side of some kind of monist system, a monist reality, where there's one ultimate reality, which has to somehow embrace or encompass both the mental aspect and the material aspect of things. So this is sort of my personal view is I've argued for things like dual aspect monism, right? So it's a monist system which has sort of the two sides, the inside and the outside, or the mental side and the material side.
Yes, this
sort
is
of in
course
a single
issuing from Spinozistic pantheism.
Yeah, well, right. That's one prominent example.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it even predates that in some ways. But
right, yeah.
But I think that's the essence of the solution, right? You really have a monistic scheme, where as material complexity increases, then so too does the mental complexity. So you see these things rise concordantly. They're sort of created in parallel in sense with the universal process, right?
That sort of brings us to this table here, which I don't know if everybody can see this, but we'll definitely flash this up on the screen here. It's in the book Metaphysics of Technology, written by Dr. Skrbina, on page 61, detailing the work of Eric Chason, where he sort of shows a table here showing that a beetle essentially has more energy density than the whole Milky Way galaxy. And that is quite a troubling fact, that the complexity of what's going on inside of a bug is more complex than what's going on inside of a star system or anything like that.
Well, right. So Chason he's a well-respected astrophysicist, scientist guy, and he's trying to measure complexity.
Yeah.
And he put it down into a single metric, right, which is the energy density.
Energy density.
Right. So I forget the full description of the term. Right?
Energy rate density.
Yeah. Energy rate density.
ERG/S/G.
Ergs per second per gram. Right.
Okay.
So basically, it's like how tightly compacted the energy is. Right. So you can take a hugely energetic object like the sun.
What is ERG?
Erg. It's a measure of energy or work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right. So some things have tons of energy, like the sun, but it's also very large. So its density is very small because it's diffused over a huge area. Whereas a small thing, relatively small thing, like an animal, a human, or a bug, even, these are much less energy than a sun, but it's very concentrated and very small energy, so the density is actually higher. So Chasen has plotted this energy density over time, and he uses this as a metric of increasing order over time as you look through evolution, and you start from early near the Big Bang, and you see relatively low energy densities, and they continue to rise over time. This is what he's plotting in that chart, and he shows it rising through material structures, then living planets like the Earth, then living beings, then societies of living beings, and ultimately to technological devices, which I thought was very interesting. So he looks at computer chips and computerized devices in the same light.
Oh, really?
And he says, well, look, even these computer chips are more energy dense than animals, than the most dense animals, which on this chart puts them even higher up than us. So you see this progression from inanimate things to animate things to technological things on kind of a progression. And this was Chasen's theory, right? That this energy density is a measure of complexity. It's just sort of on this relentless upward rise in the universe. Which, to me, that sounds exactly right. This is sort of what I was seeing. I was seeing technology as kind of a sort of a higher order level of complexity above the realm of humans and even living things. And this is where the deterministic aspect comes in. It threatens to sort of take over. It threatens to usurp us because it's working at a higher level than us, a higher level of complexity than we are. And in a sense, it's even where we cannot understand it. So you could say, well, humans, for example, are more complex than insects or simpler organisms, and they would have an impossible time understanding how we function because their level of complexity is just too low. They can't comprehend human societies and human actions. Yeah. And in a sense, we're in the same position. We're sort of like the insects or maybe the amoeba, and above us is a technological order of complexity that's being created in part by us, but also in part by natural processes, universal processes, and we barely understand this thing. I mean, we sort of know that it's there and we see specific devices, but we barely understand this thing. And it's being constructed above our heads, right? Sort of metaphysically above our heads. And to me, this is extremely dangerous. Well, this is sort of one of the morals of my book.
Well, I guess I'll sort of. You seem to be on fire, and I'll kind of push back against you now because of that. So now it seems that you've mentioned this word complexity, which I love to hate, and complexity seems like a very vague term. It seems like it seems like saying the right amount of stuff, and so here we've defined it as energy units, but isn't that energy being used and distributed on a massive scale in terms of when you zoom out, you see it all as part of one big system, so it seems like the energy, and then secondly, wouldn't the theory of evolution kind of go against because it seems like the one thing that the theory of evolution takes for granted is how mind could arise from dead matter. but you seem to have escaped that problem with panpsychism. So I would like you to discuss.
Well, that's right. So that this is a sort of an independent argument for panpsychism.
Right. Yes.
Because the traditional view has this emergence problem, right? Yes. So They assume that matter is just dead matter, it's just inert stuff.
That's right.
Just particles and forces,
Yeah.
which are completely insentient, and then somehow the complexity builds up over time to one single-celled organisms, and then multi-cell organisms, then simple life forms, and then ultimately to mammals, and then ultimately to proto-humans, and then to human beings, and then somewhere in that process, boom, at some particular point, suddenly consciousness or mind comes into being. It's like magic. It's like lightning. It's like a bolt from the blue, like a miracle, because you had these elements. The pieces of it had no mind at all, and then now implies the philosophers that at some magic point in complexity, right? Boom! Suddenly these things become the light bulb turns on, and this organism becomes conscious for the first time. That mind comes into being for the first time, which is like a miracle. It's actually literally a miracle, and we generally don't accept these kind of miracles, right? If we want to be a rational thinking philosopher. So we have to say, well, look, emergence of this kind, this brute emergence of mind from no mind, is like impossible. We can't accept that, because that's just an incomprehensible miracle in the order of nature. So it's actually far more likely and far more rational that mind was in all those elements, all the simpler components, prior to the emergence of complex beings or human beings.
And this brings us to a very radical conclusion in terms of science, and one of Paranclesis, that the atoms have a will.
Exactly.
And if an atom has a will, then wouldn't it be like a sort of a sprite or a piece of data in a computer program, and have a pre-programmed kind of a existence? And we know that when a atom, an electron wants to find its way to another electron, it will automatically choose the shortest path. And the Roomba vacuum, when it wants to move from one place to another, and it has two equidistant options, it will actually just choose one. So it seems like the Roomba vacuum is making a choice, and it seems like everything in the universe is making a small choice. It's not, Dr. Skrbina?
Well, that's true, right? So you mentioned Paranclesis, right? So this is the idea that atoms can swerve or can move based on their own choosing as an element of will. And this goes back to the ancient Greeks, right? So you're drawing from a Greek term there. And this goes back to the early atomists, so it's like Democritus and Epicurus, who said, and they had the same kind of problem, the problem of emergence. They're thinking about, where does this concept of the will come from? And they said, well, look, it can't just come out of nothing. It can't appear like a miracle out of nothing. And so it has to be down in the very elements of beings themselves. And they said, well, look, we're made of atoms. They determined that humans were made of atoms, which is actually an interesting argument in itself. We could do that another time. But they basically said, well, look, there's these atomic particles, these small undivided particles that we're made of, and if we as larger order beings have will, then the will must be there throughout the whole hierarchy of being, even down to these little elementary particles, atomic particles, that they must also have a kind of will or an ability to make decisions and moving or swerving as they're moving through space. And this was purely a logical deduction by these early Greek philosophers. It was an amazing conclusion, and it was actually been proven out in recent theories of physics. There are some published papers, I mentioned them in my book, where they've studied the motion of these particles, and they say, look, it's functioning as if these things actually have a will. And we're like, well, yeah, no joke, this is 2,000 years old story that these atomic particles have a kind of will ability to choose. And even now the physicists are coming around, and they're sort of agreeing with this outlook, right, that this is actually probably an appropriate way to think about how atoms move. So if atomic particles have a will, then it's throughout the whole hierarchy of beings and structures and technological systems as well. They have an ability to choose or to act in some willful sense.
Yeah, this brings us to a very unique concept of the Pir-e-Zun, or the Pantechnicon. which is a very potent concept. I think when I first encountered it, it almost seemed Islamic because it's almost like everything in the universe is craft. And it seems it doesn't seem like randomness or true complexity or true randomness can actually even be defined because there's a high amount of order. There's a striking amount of order in the way the universe is organized. And I would like to read a quote by G. Schwalbe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct, but this is from an old work entitled "The Origin of the Human Race," and it says, knowledge of the transformations that had taken place in language of the early phases of the family, of religion, of property, had all favored the revival of a Heraclitean view. A Heraclitean view, a strange thing to write in a book about evolution, I think. But here's our friend Heraclitus, as to the categories of political economy, it was soon to be recognized by Lassalle, and they too are more historical. The philosophy of history, moreover, gave expression under various forms to the same tendency. Hegel declares that all that is real is rational. And of course, we have the much earlier quote by Parmenides, where he said, "For everything of thinking, the same for being." Right. So thinking and being are the same. It seems like a very potent view. Yeah. And what can you tell us about the Pantechnicon, the Pire Zune?
Yeah, well, exactly, right. So there's several concepts coming in here. So for Heraclitus, he was a monist, right? And he said there's one ultimate reality of the world, and that was fire, or pir in Greek. And which actually was an amazing conclusion. I mean, this is, pre-Socratic time. This is, 500 BC. And he determines that the one reality of the universe is diverse as things look. It was fire, which was something like energy, which is basically what we would say today. If you ask a physicist, what's the one reality of the universe, he probably would say something like energy. And that's basically what Heraclitus was saying 2,500 years ago. That this fire, he called it fire, was his word for it, was the one reality, and it was not just fire, not just the kind in a candle or a campfire, but it was a fire that was alive. So the phrase was pir ezun, which means an eternally living fire. And this was the ultimate reality of the universe, of which everything was made. So it was really an astonishing phrase that Heraclitus conceived as this metaphysical reality of the universe. The later Stoic philosophers came along, and they modified it slightly. And they said, look, it's a fire for sure, but it's not just a fire. It's a fire that constructs order. And it creates, they could see it's building stars and planets. And they didn't really know what these things were, but they look out in space and they see order. They look around Earth and they see order. So this fire, this living fire, is a craftsman-like fire. It's a builder of order, right? So they came up with the phrase pure technicon, which is a creative fire. And this was a great phrase. I loved it. I use it for my publishing of my own books, Create a Fire. And that's what it was, a pure technicon. It's a fire. It's not a fire that destroys. It's a fire that creates and builds. And this is really an astonishing concept, that fire can create things, right? Can build order. So this was a pure technicon, a creative fire. To me, I sort of am borrowing on from these ideas, and I'm saying, well, look, there's this techne process throughout the universe of construction of order. There's a logos process, which is kind of a cosmic intelligence or sort of mind behind this process. So for me, I came up with this little phrase, Pantechnicon, a kind of a universal technical sphere throughout the whole universe, throughout all of history, which this logos process, this intelligent process, is bringing order to the cosmos, right? So it's a kind of a pan-technical metaphysics, a pan-technicon view of metaphysical view of the universe. And so that was kind of my interpretation of things in a modern sense.
Yeah, it seemed that Heraclitus also had another kind of view of the world, and that was kind of a bellum omnium omnes, a war of all against all, and that's kind of this thing that strife or kind of change is essential to the fabric of the universe itself. But I don't know if everything is pure azun or made by a creative fire, then isn't everything all fire? Then it seemed like it wouldn't change from being fire, would it? It would stay the same. So I guess this is where his monism comes from.
Yeah, right. Well, okay. Again, you have to be careful, because when we say the word fire, we're thinking like a candle or a flame, right?
Right.
And I really think you have to put it more in sort of more physicist terminology. It's like energy, right? So that's why it's a little bit deceiving for me to talk about fire. I prefer to think of it as energy, which is it's also sort of a diffuse concept, right? What is energy really? But we have physical measurements for it, and when we think about energy as equivalent to matter, this is the E equals mc squared equation from Einstein and so forth. So we think about equivalences between matter. Matter is sort of like a densely packed energy, right? And some kind of like a knot of energy or something, a kind of field that's so dense that it becomes something tangible and physical.
Well, it seems two thinkers throughout history have expressed this idea, a parallel idea, and one of them is, interestingly enough, a Christian thinker named John. And you talk about the Gospel of John. The opening line of the Gospel of John states, "NRK en ho logos, kai ho logos en pros ton theon, kai theos en ho logos." And you have a brilliant translation of this down here, and I don't think people are going to really hear this translation, so I'm going to have to tell them the real translation of these words, which is: the original ruling principle of the cosmos was Logos. And Logos was with God, and God was Logos. And I think we were marveling at how this could be a primary concept in Christian theology, but also in Greek theology, and how this kind of brings us to the great conflict. Wouldn't it be that Christianity seems to talk about ontological transcendence, and how we're separate from the world, but this kind of thing doesn't really exist in the original conception of the Logos.
Right. So I mean, you got to keep it in mind of the standard translation of the first line of the Gospel of John. If you take any normal Bible and you look at the Gospel of John, the beginning is a famous line, right? It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God."
Yeah.
So this is it's always been a sort of a cryptic thing. What is this thing called, the Word? It's capital W Word.
Of course, it's a Jewish concept that they put in there in place of Logos.
Exactly. Well, clearly, right. So first of all, it's clearly a Jewish concept, because John was a Jew.
Yeah, the word just literally means breath of God.
Well, right.
But of course, that's not the same thing as a Logos, the word that's used here in Greek.
So, when English speakers hear this phrase, it's like confusing. Like, in the beginning was the Word. What does that even mean? Yeah. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What does that even mean?
That's right.
And it doesn't even make any sense until you go back to the Greek original, right? So we know that all the Gospels, even though they were all four written by Jews, they were written in Greek. So this is why in my book I cited the Greek original, and the Greek word for word is logos. So if you retranslate that and say, in the beginning was Logos, and the Logos was with God, and Logos was God, now it sounds very Heraclitan, because because that's what Heraclitus said. He said that Logos was basically another name for God, for the sort of this divine power in the universe. And now you can see that this John, whoever this person John was, the Jewish writer of this gospel, he's clearly borrowing from Heraclitus. He's going back to Heraclitan ideas, which were 500 years old at this time.
Yeah, we were older. Yeah, we were also remarking that he's also from Ephesus.
Well, exactly,
in Turkey, so it's really quite odd.
Yeah, his fellow countrymen. So right. So I mean, there's obviously a familiarity there, a lot of similarity. So he's gonna it's no surprise that he takes these ideas from Heraclitus. He's going to turn them into this new sort of Christian, bogus theology. We can talk about the Jesus hoax sometime if we like.
Yes.
But he's constructing this bogus theology. What's he going to do? He's going to use existing philosophical ideas that are in circulation for hundreds of years at that time. One of those was Logos is God. So he takes this idea and he bakes it into his own little gospel, and he builds it into the story about, the Logos must have been Jesus or something. Jesus was the Word, or Jesus was Logos or something. Just to make the story fit, he's trying to match these things, the nonsense Jesus story, with the actual philosophy of Heraclitus, which was several hundred years old at that time.
That seems like an interesting, conflict. Greek ideas in the Bible there. Obviously, many have commented on how they got there, right? And we have no need to do that today for this particular segment. But we will remark on one last thing, and that is a quote by Skolomowski. Professor Henryk Skolomowski, who is one of the greatest thinkers on the problem of technology. If you're not familiar with his writings, with eco-philosophy, with Henryk Skolomowski, then you know nothing about the problem of technology. I think that should be clear. But not many people know about the work of Henryk Skolomowski, but he did say this about our modern age. He said, the process of the development of modern technology contained a number of preconditions which had to be fulfilled before technology could acquire its full potential. Technology is thus not so much a collection of tools as a state of the Western mind. Heidegger's declaration that technology is the last stage of metaphysics becomes meaningful in this context. Our inability to come to terms with technology is no doubt related to our infantile naivete about its nature. It is still assumed that technology is indifferent, that it contains no metaphysics, that its relation to traditional metaphysics is none. All these assumptions are expressions of an infantile mind.
Yeah, it's a great passage by Henryk Skolomowski. Right, so for people who don't know, so Henryk Skolomowski was he died in 2018. He was from Poland, one of the great creative minds of the past decades for sure. He was a longtime friend and mentor for me personally, so I was very fortunate to know him for almost 40 years. I studied with him when I was an undergraduate at Michigan and stayed with him ever since. So he was really a great influence for me. He was inventor of eco-philosophy, as you said. He was also one of the most prominent early critics of technology. He understood that there was a kind of metaphysics behind technology. He took the message that Ellul had laid out in the 50s and 60s, and Henryk gave it some philosophical force. He gave it kind of a basis to it in philosophy. And so even in the late 60s and early 70s, when almost nobody was talking about this, Henryk was one of these early critics and skeptics about this whole process of technology, what it was doing, and it was damaging nature and was harmful to humans. So yeah, it's a really an interesting process to see what he had to say and write about technology.
Well, it seems like that I'm getting two contradictory messages. One from Ellul, who's kind of saying that technology is something Oriental, right? That it kind of came from the East, or something essentially Oriental that entered into the Western world. I think he makes this statement in the Technological Society, and then Skolomowski here, who's kind of saying that it's a state of the Western mind. So it seems like we're kind of wrestling with concepts that, although certain Western ideas led to the growth of technology, and I think certainly Professor Skolomowski mentions Aristotle as being one of them. It seems like the whole secular humanism also issues from Western society, the thing that created most of the ideas that led to our technological age today. But then it seems that the whole critique of technology seems to issue also from Western society. so it kind of seems like because in the East, it's technology is kind of taken for granted.
Well, right. So again, there's a couple of things going on there, right? I'm not sure that Ellul necessarily declares technology to be Eastern. I guess I'd have to sort of relook at some of those passages.
Yeah, I'll definitely bring them to your attention.
I mean, he's more concerned with a larger impact on modern society, and I think he and a lot of others sort of said, well, look, it was kind of there in the foundations, the Greek philosophical foundations of Western society, kind of laid the groundwork for the modern technological society as we see it today, right? Now, there were elements in the Middle East and India and wherever else in Asia. But somehow the basis for this kind of aggressive modern technology seems to have been laid in the Western civilization, Western culture, right? The other problem was Ellul, of course, was kind of describing the surface effects. He wasn't really getting to the underlying phenomenon itself. He did a fantastic job in describing its characteristics. He had the famous 7 characteristics of modern technology.
Yes, you mentioned that in your book.
Exactly. Yeah. So I talk about that in the book, and it's extremely important. But Ellul was rightly criticized for not providing a deeper analysis, a kind of a metaphysical analysis, and that's one thing that Henryk Skolimowski started to do. In early steps, and I try to carry it a little bit further in my book, is to really give this metaphysical basis for what Ellul was seeing and what the other critics were seeing throughout history.
Yeah, in your work, and I guess we'll leave everyone with this, a beautiful work on the work of Henryk Skolimowski, entitled "The Flower and the Bulldozer." You take several the debris of the broken down Western society, and you say they have strange names: logical positivism, behaviorism, analytic philosophy, mechanistic materialism. And then you write, in the face of such a disaster, how can one begin to repair the damage, to clear away the accumulated debris of centuries, to start again? To replant the future, 2 things must be done. First, the heavy work of clearing out the shattered ruins, the failed ideologies, the corrupted and defective systems of belief. For this task, we need a powerful, discriminating mind. One capable of blasting through the intellectual debris without leveling everything in sight. For certainly many things of value remain, though they are buried deep. We need a tireless, relentless, imposing thinker of unstoppable determination. We need a sharp, focused, penetrating mind, one that is capable of heavy work of philosophical reconstruction. We need, in other words, a metaphysical bulldozer. Then, once the debris is gone, and the things of value identified and protected, we need to plant anew. We need sustainable, compassionate, sensitive, life-giving energy. We need something of beauty, a blossom of hope, a simple but elegant harbinger of the future. We need, in other words, a flower. So there you have it, folks. A bulldozer and a flower. It's what's gonna help. It's what's gonna help us all. And we thank you for joining us.